Hello and welcome to this new episode of the Eigen Values podcast. This is an audio version of the Eigen Values Substack that can be found at davidturver.substack.com. This week we cover the results of Allocation Round 6, the auction of renewables capacity, and what those results might mean for consumers. If you enjoy this podcast, please like, share and subscribe to receive more content. The much anticipated results of the annual auction of renewable capacity were released last week. The headlines about the AR6 results have been mixed, with the Telegraph claiming the auction would add £150 to household bills and Carbon Brief claiming the record-breaking auction will cut consumer bills. They cannot both be right, so time to dig into the results of the announcement and what it means. Let's start with what's actually been announced and then work to evaluate what it might mean for us. The results were announced on the government website and there's quite a lot of detail. Figure A shows a table summarising the results. Solar power with a capacity of nearly 3.3 gigawatts was awarded contracts for difference, or CFDs, at a strike price in 2024 prices of close to £70 per megawatt hour. A further 990 megawatts of onshore wind won contracts at £71 per megawatt hour, with several small tidal stream projects with a total capacity of 28 megawatts also awarded contracts at £240 per megawatt hour. Greenvolt, the largest floating offshore wind project with a capacity of 400 megawatts, won a contract at 2024 prices of 195 megawatts, £195 per megawatt hour. A total of nearly 3.4 gigawatts of new fixed onshore wind capacity won contracts at £82 per megawatt hour, and a further 1.6 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity was rebid as permitted reductions from earlier rounds and won new contracts at close to £76 per megawatt hour. The surprising thing is that all the awards came in at lower prices than the administrative strike prices that were offered in the auction. The reduction against the offer prices varies by technology, but it averages around 20%. The surprise for offshore wind comes because at the end of last year, Tom Glover, chairman of RWE's UK arm, called for offshore wind strike prices to rise by 70%. He called for price rises of £65 to £75 in 2012 terms. All the winning bids are below the range he suggested. Moreover, Baroness Brown of the Climate Change Committee and also non-executive director of offshore wind developer Ørsted warned in May that the price on offer may not be appealing enough and that government needs to be a bit more generous and a bit more flexible. This raises suspicions that there may be some other factors at play behind the scenes. Maybe the Sustainable Industry Awards, also known as extra bungs for the industry, will be brought forward from AR7. Or maybe Great British Energy, together with the Crown Estate, might put some cash into these projects on favourable terms. Chairman Jürgen Meyer certainly seems very eager to spend our money. We will have to wait and see if any further information comes to light. Even though the contract prices are lower than the administrative strike prices, they are all above the recent market reference prices as shown in Figure B. In 2024 prices, the AR6 contracts award are all more expensive than the simple average of what's called the intermittent market reference price, or IMRP, for the first 4 months of this financial year, which is about £65. Of course, by the time the projects come online, the strike price will have indexed even higher, which means that if gas prices remain at the same elevated levels, they will be in line for even higher subsidies. Of course, the strike price of the CFDs is only part of the overall cost we pay for renewables. Last financial year, we paid about £2.5 billion in grid balancing charges. Adding more intermittent renewables will only exacerbate this problem, and we can expect grid balancing charges to rise. Moreover, with so much intermittent capacity, we also need to pay through the capacity market for reliable generators to be ready to step in when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining. We paid about £1 billion for this last year, and we can expect capacity market costs to increase too. Finally, these 131 projects will need to be connected to the grid at great cost. As previously discussed, the National Grid has announced £112 billion of spending on the grid up to 2035, we will pick up these extra hidden costs of renewables through our bills. The solar and offshore wind awards are also higher than last year's contracts and almost double the government projections we discussed last week. Onshore wind prices fell slightly from last year, but then again are well above the projections in the 2023 Generation Cost Report, and those are shown in Figure C. These government projections, or similar projections from other bodies, underpin the estimates for the cost of achieving net zero. Even though the AR6 awards are better than expectations, the crocodile jaws are still wide and the costs of net zero have been woefully underestimated. So now let's try and dig in and see what the results of AR6 mean for the consumers. After going through the results of the auction, we're no clearer on how the Telegraph came by its £150 claim, nor how Carbon Brief could credibly claim lower bills. In its results announcement, the government estimates what it calls the notional monetary budget impact of the agreed strike prices and capacity. The final year estimate of the budgetary impact is close to 1.3 billion, which with roughly 28 million homes would equate to a cost of about £46 per household per year. However, the way these budgets are calculated is both convoluted and opaque. In fact, the whole budget process could probably justify a standalone article. First, all the estimates are made in 2012 prices, so we might expect the annual impact to be about 40% higher, or £64 per household in 2024 terms. However, as someone once said, it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. The CFD public budget calculations are based on these difficult predictions about the future. First, they make an estimate of the reference price in future years. The reference price is subtracted from the strike price to calculate the subsidy per megawatt hour in 2012 terms. However, their estimates of the reference price are somewhat questionable. For instance, their estimate of the reference price for 2029-30 is about £26 per megawatt hour in 2012 money, which equates to about £36 per megawatt hour in today's money, and compares to the year-to-date reference price of about £65. Using their reference price and agreed strike prices would give a subsidy of about £33 per megawatt hour, whereas using the 2012 equivalent of today's reference price of £46.70 cuts the subsidy per megawatt hour by nearly 2/3 to around £12 per megawatt hour. Clearly, the subsidy per megawatt hour is highly sensitive to the assumptions made about the reference price. Once they've settled on a subsidy per megawatt hour, the government then calculates the amount of electricity these projects will generate on an annual basis. This calculation too is problematic. They take the nameplate capacity of the winning projects and work out what the annual production will be using estimated load factors. For offshore wind, they've used 61% as their load factor. This compares to the achieved offshore wind load factor, which has averaged about 41% over the past 5 years. It's therefore likely that the actual load factors will be lower than the government estimate, meaning less electricity will be generated. Multiplying a much smaller subsidy per unit by much less generation will result in a much lower annual impact than is suggested by the government's figures, even if we do inflate it by the roughly 40% to take it up from 2012 figures to 2024 prices. We can conclude that the Telegraph's claim of £150 increase and the £46 calculated from the government's budget estimates will probably not reflect the reality of the cost of direct subsidies. However, the extra costs of renewables described earlier will have an unquantified impact. But what of Carbon Brief's claim that AR6 will lead to lower bills? In part of their article, they quote, "The only meaningful comparison is between a system that has these additional wind and solar projects and a system that does not." That's actually quite sensible. And as we've shown above, all the contracts have been awarded at prices above recent market reference prices. The only way that AR6 contracts could be lower priced than gas-fired electricity in the future is if gas prices rise much faster than the index-linked strike prices of CFDs. However, if gas prices were to rise sharply, then inflation would undoubtedly rise too, meaning CFD strike prices would catch up with gas prices in the year following the spike. As it happens, the 2029 futures price of gas is about 65p a therm, which is quite a lot lower than the recent prices that have averaged in the range of 85 to 90p a therm. This means that the price of gas-fired electricity is likely to fall. So the CFD strike prices are likely to remain above those of gas-fired electricity over the medium term. The gap would be even wider if we remove the carbon tax on gas-fired electricity and invested in new sources of supply to bring gas prices down. Moreover, if we did not add the extra renewables to the system, we would incur lower grid balancing costs and capacity market costs, and would need to spend less on grid expansion. Finally, it's a racing certainty that the floating offshore wind and tidal stream projects will add to bills because their strike prices are many multiples of current market prices. Although they are relatively small in the grand scheme of things, so the impact will be tiny. It's beyond reasonable doubt that AR6 will add to consumer prices. However, there are too many variables to make a sensible estimate of the precise impact. We shall now go on to examine some of the other aspects of the AR6 announcement. As mentioned above, about 1.6 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity was rebid in AR6 as permitted reductions. This means that some of the companies that won contracts in AR4 have failed to deliver on their contractual commitments. Inchcape, Moray West, East Anglia 3 and Hornsea Project 3 all won contracts at £37.35 per megawatt hour in 2012 prices in 2022. They've all been allowed to rebid parts of their projects and have been awarded new contracts at £54.23 per megawatt hour, again in 2012 terms, which represents a 45% increase. In a rational world, failing to honour a contract would result in penalties, but in the topsy-turvy world of green energy, failure leads to extra rewards. It's also interesting to analyse who is going to benefit from these new contracts. Starting with the projects that won through permitted reductions, Inchcape is a 50-50 joint venture between Chinese company Red Rock Renewables and Irish energy company ESB. Moray West is mostly owned by EDP Renewables and Engie. EDP is headquartered in Texas, and Engie is a French utility. East Anglia 3 is wholly owned by Scottish Power Renewables, which is ultimately owned by Spanish energy giant Iberdrola. Hornsea Project 3 is owned by Danish group Ørsted. The new projects awarded in AR6 are Hornsea Project 4 and East Anglia 2, and both have the same ownership as their namesakes above. In summary, all of the offshore wind projects awarded contracts in AR6 have foreign owners, and it is those owners who will benefit from the subsidies, effectively sucking money out of the UK economy. Moving on to other aspects of the AR6 results, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband claimed the sixth renewables auction delivers record-smashing 131 clean energy projects, powering the equivalent of 11 million homes. Miliband went on to assert that the new rollout of low-carbon electricity is a key step for UK energy independence and energy security. Ofgem says that the average household electricity consumption is 2,700 kilowatt hours. 11 million homes would mean an annual consumption of about 29.7 terawatt hours. For these projects to achieve that level, we would need to assume a 10.5% load factor for solar, 34% for onshore wind, and 50% for the various flavours of offshore wind. If instead we use the average load factors for the past 5 years, then there is only enough energy for 9.1 million homes. However, this is also a misleading claim, because the electricity generated will not be at the time it's needed. Solar produces most on summer days when demand is low, and nothing at all on winter evenings. It's obvious that wind turbines only produce electricity when the wind is blowing, so on those cold, calm winter evenings when demand is highest, these new projects will power close to zero homes. In recent years, both electricity demand and generation have fallen, probably due to soaring prices. However, imports have risen. Adding more intermittent renewables means we will probably have to rely more on imports over the interconnectors when demand is higher than domestic supply. It's exceedingly difficult to see how this improves energy security. So how do these contract awards compare to the Labour Party's promises that they made during the election? Famously, Ed Miliband promised that in their 2024 manifesto to double onshore wind, triple solar power, and quadruple offshore wind by 2030. At the end of 2023, we had 16.2 gigawatts of solar power, 15.4 gigawatts of onshore wind, and 14.7 gigawatts of offshore wind. To meet Miliband's solar target, we need to deliver 4.6 gigawatts of solar each year. The AR6 contract awards fell short by about 1.3 gigawatts, or 29% short of the target. Onshore wind fell short by 1.2 gigawatts, or 55% short of the required rate, and new offshore wind fell 2.9 gigawatts, or 46% short of the required rate to meet Labour's promise. These shortfalls means the target of achieving a net zero grid by 2030 is all but out of reach. In conclusion, the government hailed the AR6 results in terms that Borat would not find unusual, describing them as the most successful renewables auction to date. Although the strike prices were lower than anticipated, the new projects will increase consumer bills, so the success will only be felt by the project developers. That all the offshore projects are owned by foreign investors means the profit from these developments will accrue overseas and UK consumers will foot the bill. Some of the developers have even been rewarded for past failure. Even this great success is not enough to get on track to meet Miliband's suicidal renewable energy targets and his ambition of a net zero grid by 2030. We can expect more damage to be done to the economy and consumers before the whole edifice comes tumbling down. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel to receive more content, or sign up at davidturver.substack.com.